We are live. Good evening, everyone. I'm David Johnson, Transform Ed Consulting, and we have as our guest tonight Sara D. Bender. Sara, how you doing?
Good, David. How are you?
I'm good too. Talk to me. Tell us where you are in the world.
Well, I am coming at you from the Indianapolis area here in Indiana, and I'm ready for fall, I think. How about you?
Well, we've been ready for fall since June. It's still 90 degrees here
Oh,
in San Antonio, Texas.
I'm ready for bonfires.
Yeah, we don't need any more fires. Thank you very much. Well, let me introduce you. Sara D. Bender, CEFL, CFRM, and PhD student, is an emerging scholar from the Department of Educational Studies, Teachers College, Ball State University, Muncie, Indiana. Ms. Bender's research interests include philanthropy for K-12 public schools, or what she calls the hidden economy of public schooling. Her interest stems from her professional experience with nonprofit 501c3 local education foundations in roles as an executive director and as a consultant. It also stems from her experience as the National Program Director for Industry Certification. At the heart of her work is a passion to empower education foundation leaders as they connect community resources to classroom needs. Ms. Bender is an industry subject matter expert in marketing and resource development. She is a frequent industry conference presenter. She has also presented and published scholarly articles regarding educational studies and technology. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here. Well, you've got a lot of credentials here. So tell us, or even help us out with what CEFL means and what CFRM means.
Sure. So CEFL stands for Certificate in Education Foundation Leadership. And that's actually the program that I direct now. And that is available to education foundation leaders across the country. And the CFRM is from the Lilly School of Philanthropy, the fundraising school here at IUPUI. And that stands for Certificate in Fundraising Management.
So you've got both the scholarly background, the academic background, as well as the practical background.
I'm trying to bridge those worlds, theory and practice. That's always fun, you know.
Well, tell us about some of the courses that you've taken or some of the academic work you've done.
Yeah. So the program that I'm in now is educational studies, and it's the first time that I've ever studied education. My academic background is in business management and marketing. My master's is in hospitality and tourism from Purdue, the school that's better than IU in Indiana.
Something got caught in my throat, Sara. I'm sorry.
I had to, David. You put me there. So I spent a lot of time in the for-profit world and ended up in education foundations. I didn't even know what they were, but my kids were in school and our district had one, and they needed an executive director, and that's how I entered the scene. And I really started to see some of the issues in schools, but I didn't have that educational background. So I was trying to apply some of my knowledge from the corporate world and into this education space. And that led me to my PhD work, where I'm trying to kind of understand that world so that I can help make those connections.
Now, you're a busy person, you're a student, you're a mother, you're a working person, working woman. How do you have time to also be an industry subject matter expert in marketing and to be a industry conference presenter, and as well as add all the other things that you do?
Well, I don't do a lot of sleeping, so that's that's one thing that helps. But all of these things are passions for me. I'm passionate about my family. I'm passionate about the education that they're getting, and I'm really passionate about how we can use community support to better that whole process. So those things keep me motivated. And I have to say that I have a really good support system. My husband is very helpful and very supportive in what I do. and definitely couldn't be doing this without him.
Well, now, Sarah, we got to talk a little bit about this rivalry between the real Indiana University and the school that just happens to be in Indiana, Purdue. So you have your master's degree from Purdue.
That's correct.
Uh-huh. And the reason I'm wearing all of my IU bling today, the shirt, the cap, I got my key ring, I've got the ring going on here, is because of the rivalry between IU and Purdue.
Well, I'll let you have your moment. This is your show, David.
So. Okay. Yes, I'm a Hoosier and you're a Boilermaker, okay?
That's right.
All right. Well, Sarah, where should we jump in? We have 6 topics today under the title, The Hidden Economy of Public Schooling. But you know what? That's the title of your dissertation too, isn't it?
It is. In my program, there's a lot of critical influence through educational studies. And this kind of is a spin from something that a scholar named Philip Jackson coined, I think it was in the 60s, called the hidden curriculum. And that kind of took a look at the school atmosphere. So there's an official curriculum that students are exposed to. That's might be what we think of in textbooks and what is taught. But there's this hidden curriculum that has to do with the entire environment that the school is in and all of the social factors that play into that. And, those have been dominated by different conflicting ideologies from time to time. And so along that thread, Michael Apple expands on some of those things and lays some groundwork for another scholar to come in and talk about hidden markets of education, and especially in dealing with the privatization of education. And that's Patricia Birch. And she kind of takes a look at the industries that are profiting off of public school funds. We might think about textbooks, and of course now we have technology and all of these entities that public schools rely on. So that's kind of the hidden market. On the flip side of that, there are organizations that fund schools, that fund things that public funding just can't keep up with. And so that's where I'm interested in some further exploration.
Well, let's jump into our agenda.
Sure.
Where shall we start?
Well, let's start at the top.
Okay. Philanthropy in American education. With that said, public education is fairly new in the history of the United States.
It is. But philanthropy in American education predates the founding of the country. It predates public school by far. When you kind of think back to the 1600s and the colonial movement here, their education at the time was a very private matter. It was a family affair done in the homes. And you started seeing religious organizations and mission societies funding a version of a community school for poor children that couldn't afford this. And there was a lot of religious ideology attached to that. And in fact, some of the earliest legislation is the Old Deluder Satan Act from the Puritans. And what that basically mandated was that any town, as America was growing in population, any town that had more than 50 households were required to have a community teacher. And of course, there was a lot of emphasis on biblical literature and some of those tones. So that kind of starts way before we have public school. We have evidence of philanthropy funding education.
So again, speaking of public schools means that the school is funded from a public source.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're talking about before public schools, then it relies solely upon philanthropy.
Correct, or some sort of private funding. There's bequests and individuals that supported schools before this. But the first public school is the Boston Latin School, established in 1635. And so it's no surprise that they also have the earliest version of what we might call an education foundation, or theirs is referred to as an association that's heavily alumni driven. And yeah, so that was started in 1844 because the public school system provided the facilities, but they didn't have a library. So, so the alumni got together, and one of their current employees there tells me it was like a few old men throwing some coins in a hat trying to buy books for students. I'm sure it was a little bit more sophisticated than that, but yeah, it hasn't always been a real sophisticated effort. But yeah,
Sarah, I think you just opened a can of worms, and there might even be a connection between what's happening in school and public libraries as related to that scenario you just described.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of connections between those two.
And why parents believe that they should decide what students learn and what libraries have in their collections.
Right. And, of course, if someone is funding those things, there's a little bit of influence on what that might entail. And if that's not the public funding it, you open the door for different ideologies to start a battlefield. And they say nothing is new under the sun. And here we are.
Yeah. And the other part of that is what goes around comes around. Yeah, that's
true.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, so philanthropy kind of continues to grow. It changes with the industrial era and this mass accumulation of American wealth through this industrial revolution, I guess. And out of that, one of the most notable, we do see a lot of what you see as the major philanthropic entities funding Black education in the South. Now, on one hand, that is credited for that education that probably would not have existed, at least not the way that it was, not expanded that way. At the same time, you have to look at that and say, well, what is the motivation here? Is it truly to support this? We know that the Hampton-Tuskegee model that really funneled Black education toward industrial training and manual labor, essentially providing more opportunities than were available during slavery, but maybe definitely not equal opportunities, and definitely not an equal education system.
Sarah, sounds like you're speaking from Michael Apple. One of my favorite or something that sticks in my head from Apple is the entire education system is designed to maintain the status quo. And I think that's part of the battle that we've had over all these years, to have the education system, particularly as it affects poor or minority race students, low income or minority race students, break out of the maintain the status quo system.
Sure.
Yeah. So the example you gave was an example of maintaining the status quo, keeping people where they are and not much above it.
Sure. And that kind of just sets the stage with philanthropy. Philanthropy has definitely advanced education. Definitely wouldn't be where we are without it. But there definitely are areas for concern with how this is funded and used and all of those things.
Very good, Sarah. Thank you. That was
a little history lesson.
Yeah, that was good. All right, where should we go next?
Well, I guess that kind of, if you kind of skip a century there, moving from industrial to kind of post-civil rights, we start to see the rise of all kinds of nonprofit organizations. Most of them are driven toward civil right type causes or social justice issues. And in 1983, the Ford Foundation provided funding for several local education foundations across the country, specifically to support the needs of teachers so they could in turn support students. And that organization grew as what was known as PEN, or the Public Education Network, a little bit more of an advocacy slant there. But really, the game changed in the early 2000s, especially with the economic downturn around 2008. And an organization called the National School Foundation Association emerged to kind of meet that need. At the time, I believe it was more than half of the nation's schools got permanent funding cuts.
Permanent funding cuts.
Okay. And, the trend had been localized government, school boards of education kind of set the tax rate. It kind of controlled some of that. And with all these cuts, we really started to see this shift. This kind of goes into another point of the privatization of education. As those cuts constrained public education, we kind of see private schools and charter schools and voucher programs kind of all emerge from that. But the National School Foundation Association was created with a vision to create equitable and excellent opportunities for all of our nation's students. And that started with foundations at many public schools across the country.
I'd like to go back to the title of our conversation, The Hidden Economy of Public Schooling.
Sure.
So if foundations and philanthropists are involved with, especially in an effort to create equity within schools, is that the hidden economy of which you speak?
It all plays into it. So, and I kind of see this hidden economy as having sort of three tiers. So there's kind of this corporate level, which we might call venture philanthropy.
Okay.
And we've seen efforts of this. There's the New Jersey case where Cory Booker and Chris Christie got together with Mark Zuckerberg, and they were going to reform education and turn this thing around. And by and large, it did not create that model that they wanted to replicate. Mm-hmm. And really what happened is it really strengthened the charter schools in the area and not the public schools. So that's one end of it. And I see one of the issues there is that too much influence without much local input. So you're trying to help the people not without their input. And that ended up being a problem. On the other end, we're familiar with all of these kind of micro philanthropies like PTOs, PTAs, booster clubs. I believe in the school district that my children attend, there are 75 different clubs at the high school, and each one of them most all of them have some sort of parent organization that kind of helps support them, because public funding doesn't cover those things. And, the risk there is that you have a very high integration between beneficiary and benefactor. So, wealthy parents support the endeavors of their kids, and it's very targeted. So not all the students benefit. And I like to see education foundations as kind of being a nice middle ground, kind of that local democracy building where they support an entire school district and have a little bit of control of spreading that and creating equitable experiences. So, but all of that to say, the majority of this money is very difficult to track.
Right.
There have been studies that have Giving USA noted about $71 billion, I believe. $71 billion that went as reported charitable giving to education in 2021. So it's a big industry. Now, just to give you some context, there was a study in 2014 that looked at data from 1995 to 2010. So this is based on IRS reported data. In 1995, we're looking at 196 million donated to schools. By 2010, 880 million. And today we're looking at 71 billion.
Sarah, could we go back? You didn't use this word, but I'll use it. The disparity that exists between or among schools where we have wealthy districts and, of course, low-income districts. And I think one of the reasons school district, K-12 school district foundations have grown or proliferated is because of the decline in the amount of support that states give to schools or provide to schools. Now, in Texas, at one time there was a system called Robin Hood, and generally all states operate this way, where they try to make equitable support to schools. But how does all that come together when you have parent groups who are from wealthy districts, state funding, local tax bases? How does that all come together to affect equity in schools?
And that's a great question that I'm trying to understand better through some case study research that I'm working on. And it's hard. And I think the sources, the very, if it's wealthy parents trying to support their own kids, is it the community trying to support all of the children in the community? Or is it some outside influencer trying to advocate for educational reform? And it's tough. It's tough to say what that impact is. And it's even more difficult with kind of this hidden economy, because we don't know how much that is. These numbers that I'm throwing out are based on reported data. There are all those fundraisers. I'm sure you've been asked to buy cookie dough and trash bags and laundry detergent, probably all in the last week. And all of those things don't really go reported. And in fact, I think the magic number is if the organization doesn't make $50,000, they don't have to report it at all. So there's a ton of money going into public education that's unaccounted for. It's hard to track what that's doing, if that's good or bad, or there's just so much that we don't know.
Sorry, we have just like 7 minutes remaining.
I know this
you mentioned this middle number. So you said there are like 3 different levels. So you said in the middle, there are these foundations that were concerned with equity.
Yes.
Tell us how that works.
Well, so it varies from place to place. So there's even more opportunity to inspect critically. But typically what I'm familiar with working with are foundations that are set up to support an entire school district. And it's an interesting model because, like I mentioned, there are markets that want to kind of profit from public funding. But here, this is an opposite version of nonprofits that want to pour money into schools. And this kind of is, we're kind of in the growing stages of this education foundation movement. So it was kind of started to meet immediate needs that were cut by public funding. And some of that has been, I don't want to say it's been leveled, because there's definitely funding cuts, but there's, different schools have different needs. And so foundations cover a lot of things. But the goal underneath them from a national perspective is to try to fund things that create more equitable experiences. And getting that message out to leaders is a challenge, because there's not a lot of connection if there aren't memberships. So that's one of my passions, is trying to help foundation leaders understand what this is and how it fits in the scheme of everything, and how we can make better decisions, and criticize our own decisions, frankly, to make sure that we're supporting all students.
So when we speak of foundations, are you speaking of, let's say, large national foundations, for any one of those gigantic foundations? Or are you speaking of foundations that school districts might create themselves?
I'm speaking more of not the large ones, not the outside, more community-based. Oftentimes we do see them started by a school district, or sometimes of engaged community members within a school district, but definitely community-based, place-based philanthropy.
In the conversation of community-based foundations, what kind of money should they be seeking to raise? And then, even in your bio, you described that your passion is to connect community resources, classroom needs. Would that be the level and the type of money, the kind of money community foundations should raise and how they should focus their philanthropy?
I think it varies from place to place. I think it's about meeting the needs, and sometimes that goes all the way down to the classroom levels. The goal is to support those kids that may not come to school with the same preparation. That might look like a package of markers, and it might look like trying to address issues that will create some meaningful reform on a larger scale. But foundations right now at their point of evolution, I guess, are really still trying to make those micro changes in organizations and support students that are being left out.
Micro changes, that's a good term. Well, we have like 3 or 4 minutes remaining. So where do you want to go next?
Well, I think through part of that, I think we did cover most of those topics.
Local democracy. What would be a definition you use for democracy?
Yeah, so I actually did a conference presentation on making the case for local education foundations as being a cultivator of local democracy around public education. So to me, the idea of democracy has a lot to do with voice and representation in decision making, especially. And I mentioned earlier that a lot of states have kind of taken control of educational funding back more to the state level, less control locally. But education foundations are a way that people within a community can show their voice of support for public school systems, and kind of still represent that those local demands or local desires of education.
I'm thinking of Texas and Indiana's like this too. We have small communities where everything would revolve around the school district, particularly Friday night. You know the term Friday night lights. Yeah. Yep. So when you speak of democracy, I would guess that those are the kinds of things that would be included in your thinking about democracy. All the voices are heard. There's representation of all the community members, every segment of the community, and those things are reflected in the type of support that schools receive and students receive.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Because democracy, in my mind, I think people confuse democracy with I lost the term. Majority rule, and they're different. They're different. Democracy is a. Go ahead. You please elaborate.
No, I'm just absolutely agreeing with you that, you can have an unhealthy balance when you have too much community influence in what goes on in schools, but you can also have a bad balance when there's too much isolation between those two. Right. So I see the foundation as being kind of a buffer in between that wants to align with school values, but also represents the voice of the community, but not a direct individual or a direct entity that can dictate how this is used.
Sarah, our conversation could go on forever. And I warned you that 30 minutes goes quickly. So if you could boil all this down to a takeaway that you would want people to have, what would it be?
It would be that philanthropy has always been part of education, and it's not going away anytime soon. But we are at a crucial point where we need to structure this and get it right. We have all of these organizations popping up. And while I see it as a real opportunity to bring that community democracy aspect into funding public schools, there's also an awful lot of opportunity to get it wrong. And so with my research, I'm hoping that I can kind of identify and uncover and look for ways that we can set this up right and empower leaders to lead from that perspective.
And if people want to know more, how do they contact you?
There's a link there for my LinkedIn. I'd love to get a message from you or a request. You could also find me on Twitter. I'm not super active there, but I do check it and check messages if you want to connect with me there.
Also on LinkedIn, you're Sara D. Bender.
That's correct. Don't forget the D in there. That takes you to someone else.
Yeah, I know that one too. I'm David E. Johnson. Yes, I'm with you 100%. Well, Sara, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. Sara D. Bender, CEFL, CFRM, and PhD student, is an emerging scholar from the Department of Education Studies, Teachers College, Ball State University, Muncie, Indiana. And she's a mom, and she's a this, and she's a that. She's a lot of different things. I'm David Johnson from Transform Ed Consulting, and I must give credit to my dear colleague, Cassandra Williams, who allows us to use her channel, her YouTube and Facebook channels. Thank you all for being here this evening, and I look forward to seeing you the next time around. Good night.
Good night. Thanks, David.
Thank you.